Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Small is Mighty, another one in our webinar series straight from the horse's mouth. As usual, we'll keep it to 30 minutes and today we focus on carbon, more specifically on a route for SMEs to set science-based targets, because the Science-Based Target Initiative just recently launched a new and streamlined approach to also make it possible for SMEs to get onto this journey. We have two guest speakers today. We have Monica Richter from WWF and my colleague Emily Townsend, our own carbon expert. Before I hand over to Monica, who will talk about the new approach, I'll just say, why is it important for SMEs? SMEs make up about a third of the GDP in Australia and New Zealand, and all the SMEs are suppliers to the larger companies. In New Zealand, there is a Climate Leaders Coalition with about 115 businesses. They've all have signed a pledge to report on their emissions and to reduce in line with the Paris Agreement and to bring their suppliers along the journey. And suppliers are the SMEs. So that new approach is a really good way of doing that. So I'm on the steering group of the Climate Leaders Coalition, and we felt it was really important to bring all the SMEs along. And that's why we've included it in the pledge for everyone to say, yep, I will bring my suppliers along. And finally, we have a pathway to actually do that. One other thing is 2 days ago, the Recover Better initiative was launched. It is also headed and initiated by the Science-Based Target Initiative. And it's 155 companies who have signed up and committed to helping recover better in response to COVID-19. It's so far only 6 businesses in Australia and New Zealand. We are one of them. And we'd really like to urge all of you to sign up and come along on that journey. And with that, over to you, Monica.
So very briefly, hello everybody. Just want to introduce the Science-Based Target Initiative. It was set up in 2015 in the lead up to the Paris Agreement to demonstrate to governments that that private sector could develop ambitious longer-term commitments aligned to the Paris Agreement towards a net zero by 2050 and medium-term targets towards 2030. So it's a partnership between CDP, UN Global Compact, World Resources Institute and WWF, and in Australia it's supported by, and New Zealand supported by UN Global Compact, Global Compact Network Australia and WWF. So we're very excited to be launching the support documentation for SMEs to sign up. It's been a long time coming, and as science-based targets becomes more institutionalized with bigger companies and bigger businesses, getting their supply chains to be making those commitments around science-based targets is fundamentally important to the companies getting their own Scope 3 emissions in order. So briefly about the SME material. So an SME is defined by the Science-Based Target. It's a non-subsidiary independent company employing fewer than 500 employees. And that's where SMEs fall into it. It's a streamlined approach, and from July 15 this year, it will be the only route available for SMEs. And you'll note that there are a few SMEs that have already signed up to the SBT process, but this will allow those SMEs and many others to come on board to align their business with a well below 2 degree or 1.5 degree warming. So it does align with the greenhouse gas protocol. So you need to be committing to achieving your Scope 1 and 2 targets in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol, and then measuring your emissions around Scope 3 following the greenhouse gas protocol value chain. Now, if you have any challenges identifying those materials, please feel free to reach out to me. You can put some questions in the chat box, and then companies must commit to report against their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions on an annual basis. So the expectation around a well below 2 degree target is for your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions to be 30% below your trajectory from 2018 to 2030. And if you're committing to a 1.5 degree, then you're committing to a 50% reduction in that time frame, which is exactly aligned with what the science is saying, that we have to halve our carbon budget between now and 2030 to keep warming below 1.5. So it's a pretty straightforward process. There's a form to be filled out, ticking the boxes. So you provide that detail to the advisory team, and it's a reduced fee of $1,000 US. It was for the bigger companies just under 5,000 US. So that's a pretty significant reduction, and that goes directly towards the technical reviewer having a look at your program and seeing that you're aligning your targets with the 1.5 or well below 2 degrees. The scope 3 expectation, again, you need to follow the greenhouse gas protocol value chain emissions, but at this stage there is no requirement for you to be providing that level of technical detail, but you need to commit to be undertaking the work to be doing that. And I think that's where it really is an advantage to SMEs to be able to then start to look through their supply chains and see where their first, second, third tier goods and services providers makes that very specified process to be asking those kind of questions through your procurement chain. And of course that makes it speedier and less costly for the companies. So I guess I think that might be pretty much a summary. I've gone through what the 1.5 and well below 2 degree target is, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Monica. We already have one question, more of a comment really, and that is about the threshold. That 50 is usually what is more common in Australia and New Zealand for SMEs. So 500 is quite large, but I guess that's because of the global context, or could you shed some light on that?
That's right. It is really designed for a global perspective, and just like the SBTI itself, the Science-Based Target Initiative is taking that very much that global perspective for companies in Australia and New Zealand. A number of the SMEs that have signed up are very small consultancies or other smaller entities, and at some point in time, the criteria is refined every year. If there was a sense that bigger companies were slipping in to the net without setting their scope 3, there might be an expectation that we would tighten up that criteria into the future. But this was a way to try and really streamline and get as many smaller companies into the mix as we possibly could.
Before we hand over to Emily, we'd also be interested to hear from you out here. What are your key drivers for setting a target? Is it your customers asking? Is it pressure from internal stakeholders? Do your staff want you to do it? Is it about demonstrating leadership? Are you investors or the owners of the business pushing for it? Or is it membership commitments, like being a member of the Climate Leaders Coalition, for example? We'll let a few more cast their vote. Demonstrating leadership definitely is taking a lead here. Membership commitments is one answer. And the vast majority really are doing it to demonstrate leadership. I think that's really, really cool, because that is where the real drive then will come from. So you're not just doing it to tick a box, but to really do the right thing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And now, Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, those are really interesting results. I think it reflects as well how relatively early we are with science-based targets. It's still quite a new thing, and if you are setting an SBT, you definitely are leading the way. So congratulations to everyone who's here, because that's awesome. So today, we want to talk a little bit about why ThinkStep set a science-based target. We are an SME, so hopefully it will help to provide some examples about why it's important for SMEs in general, and what some of the difficulties might be as well in terms of achieving it. We are, as ThinkStep, we're passionate about enabling organizations to succeed sustainably. And that has to include ourselves. We really want to walk the talk when it comes to our own impacts. And we know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is good for business as well as the environment and society as a whole. So when the opportunity came up to set a science-based target, it just made sense to us. Coming back to that leadership thing, we do think it's important to lead by example and to ensure that we act in line with climate science and with our own values, particularly because that's what we're trying to help others do. To that end, we're supporting the Science-Based Targets Initiative by our own commitment, but also by encouraging and supporting other companies to set their own targets. Setting and working towards a science-based target means that we know that we can be sure we're doing enough, that we're playing our part to keep global warming increase below 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial temperatures. And because science-based targets are based on the latest climate science research, it means they require real decarbonisation. So even though we've chosen to also offset our remaining emissions, we know that reduction comes first, and those science-based targets are about reduction, not offsetting. This quote is just to influence that. It's no longer about how much you think you can do or what you want to set, it's how much you need to do. In terms of where SMEs fit into that, we're only going to be able to limit global warming if everybody plays their part. And you don't have to be big to show leadership, as you can see by everyone there online wanting to demonstrate that. Reducing your emissions by whether it's 30% or 50% is a challenging task, no matter how small your baseline is. It's a percentage reduction, so it's still getting from where you are to a much lower amount. Setting a science-based target helps to spread the message to your employees as well, and it can help promote individuals to take action on their own carbon footprint. So it is about helping to widen the net. For New Zealand-based companies, as Barbara already mentioned, having an approved science-based target also satisfies one of the requirements of the Climate Leaders Coalition. And you really can say that you are showing leadership by not just having a target that's aligned with science, but also one that's verified to be in line with science. Larger companies with significant Scope 3 emissions are required by the SBTi to set Scope 3 targets and to reduce emissions in their supply chain. And CLC, as Barbara said, also requires that their signatories bring the supply chain along on the journey. SMEs account for the vast majority of businesses in Australasia, so we are that supply chain, and this helps us to get on board. Science-based targets remove that question of how much you can do. You don't have to justify the ambition of your target because it's already set. So that means you can concentrate on achieving it. The new pathway also means that you can focus your efforts on your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are probably feel more relevant and more achievable than some of the Scope 3 stuff, especially for a small business. Companies with ambitious targets will also be best placed to benefit from that transition to a low carbon economy. A target helps to focus efforts throughout your team and your supply chain as well. It supports innovation and competitiveness, and it reduces risk because it means that you're staying ahead of future regulations, and also helps to bolster your investor confidence. So there's good things all around. As a typical small service-based company, our Scope 1 and 2 emissions are very low, as you can see. They're almost invisible apart from the biogenic carbon, and they're significantly outweighed by our Scope 3 emissions, particularly business travel. In the interest of transparency, we published our baseline and also our target on our website, and we'll continue to publish our emissions annually, including progress against our target. We should have our 2019 emissions published quite soon. We're just working through the details of them. When we first set our target, we took a really detailed approach to measuring our Scope 3 baseline. We wanted to make sure that we fully understood the process and the likely hotspots. So we did more than just the screening that used to be, is required by SBTi, not for SMEs, but the normal process. We really drilled into it. We wanted to make sure that we understood the hotspots and that we could advise other companies with similar businesses on what to focus on. So now that we've got our target, we can focus our efforts on measuring and reducing our hotspots. You can see that business travel, particularly flying, somewhat dwarfs our footprint, and employee commuting also has considerable impacts. And we included in that the impacts for those employees who are home-based, so their energy use. Our purchased goods and services looks like quite a big chunk in that pie diagram. But that category covers a whole wealth of individual purchases. So everything from professional services from accountants and designers through to purchasing refurbished laptops. We decided not to focus on that area simply because it's got so many different parts to it. And also with the things that we purchase, we have slightly less opportunity to impact on it. We originally set our target in January 2019. using our 2018 baseline as our baseline. Once the new, more ambitious target levels were introduced in April 2019, we updated our Scope 1 and 2 target. So we updated our commitment in September 2019 to a 51% reduction by 2030. Our Scope 3 target remained on our original ambition, which is a 38% reduction by 2030. And you can see that we're concentrating on our business travel and our employee commuting. Our target's published on the Science Based Targets Initiative website, and that shows that it's consistent with 1.5 degrees of warming and gives details about what it is. There are, I think, 35 companies committed in Oceania now who have either committed or set targets, and there's a few in there with 1.5 degree targets, which is really good to see. I've talked a bit about how we set it, but what are the challenges? The first thing to say is the Science Based Targets Initiative has excellent resources to guide you through setting and developing a target. They were, even before the development of the SME specific resources, which make it really simple, they've always had a really good guide and a simple way to identify an ambition level and how to set an appropriate target. The thing is, the target actually turns out to be the easy bit. Achieving your target is the real challenge. So what does it look like? With the nature of our business, it won't surprise you to know that we've always strived to reduce our emissions and that all of our staff are bought into that process. So we don't really have any low-hanging fruit. Added into that, the New Zealand grid's already really highly decarbonised. So our challenges for our Scope 1 and 2 are to further reduce our electricity consumption and reduce our use of fuels for heating and for cooking, or transition them over to electricity. To help manage those, we recently moved into our Wellington-based staff into a new office, which you can see on the right. We fully refurbished that office and fully insulated it to make it as energy efficient as possible. So it was designed and built with that in mind to help us reduce our emissions. Hopefully that will get us most of the way there for our Scope 1 and 2. Monica mentioned that SMEs are not required to set targets for your Scope 3 emissions, but you are still required to measure them and to reduce them. And that can be quite daunting if you don't know what it's looked like. You know, how to go about it. It's easy if you know how, and if you can concentrate your effort on your most significant areas. I mentioned that we went to the nth degree with our own measurement, and that gives us a really good idea of where the significant impacts are likely to be. And for most small service-based companies, business travel's likely to be a big area. As a small company, it's quite easy to feel that you don't have much influence on your suppliers. So, you know, where do you actually start to reduce those? For us, we don't have a lot of control over the emissions caused by business travel. If we fly, we don't control the plane. And we also try to avoid business travel wherever possible. So our challenge is to identify further ways to reduce our impacts in that area and while maintaining our service offering to our clients. That last point is a little nod to the fact that with most companies, we've been doing pretty well on reducing our impacts from business travel in the last couple of months. The best plans have the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. So it's really important that we understand our impacts, the impacts of recent circumstances, and what we can usefully implement in the longer term. So how can we learn from that and learn from, for instance, how awesome webinar technology has turned out to be and how much it's improved over the last few months, and maintain some of those gains that we've made. And I think a lot of companies will be looking at how they can best support their clients and their employees in the future through more flexible working patterns. Thank you. I think that covers us. And happy, of course, to take questions.
Thank you very much, Emily. I can report, before we come to the questions, today is the first day after lockdown that we're actually using the office since summer, basically. And the first day we need to heat it, and we only need a tiny heater to keep the office really nice and warm today. So it's working. I have got a couple of questions here, and so Jan was wondering the green in our graph, that was Scope 3. I'll just quickly go back. That is actually Scope 1 because it's our direct emissions, largely from running our fireplace. So it is Scope 1, but of course it is direct emissions here. Then Chris is wondering if that we have set what our target is, but not quite how we got there and what methodology we have used. And maybe there, Monica, you have an answer, but also Emily, maybe you could then say what methodology or what of the approaches we have used. So Monica, if you would like to go first.
Yeah, so I think what the Science-Based Target Initiative has is a range of different tools and resources that companies can draw upon to have a look at what kind of methodologies are available. Obviously, the Scope 1 and Scope 2, you're guided by the greenhouse gas protocol. There's also a manual on the website. So I'll put my contact details into the chat, and if you want to get in contact with me, you can, and I can send you through. And I use that. That's sort of my initial go-to whenever I'm having to answer questions. I get a lot of questions from people around the details, but that manual and the resources are definitely designed to help you where you're struggling with the technicality.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mentioned that there's good resources on the website. So when we initially set our target back in January 2019, we used the version 3 resources at the time. They didn't actually have the ability to set a 1.5 degree target, and they didn't really have a set. They didn't really identify those benchmarks quite as clearly. So when we set it, we started out by understanding what we'd need to do to be roughly in line with well below 2 degrees. The new resources that came out in April 2014, which were version 4, actually was so much clearer. So the process that we went through was an absolute reduction. Essentially, there's an Excel workbook that's available through the Science-Based Targets Initiative website, and you set what your current emissions are, what you want to target, whether it's 1.5 or 2, and hit go, and it tells you what you need to reduce by, and obviously you put in what your target year is. With the new SME guidance, it's even more simple. Again, basically you tick the box as to whether you want to sign up to a 1.5 or well below 2, and it tells you what percentage reduction is. But that reduction is aligned with the resources that are available for full-size businesses, so you can actually look at it in more detail and understand it, because the reduction requirements are the same. There are other resources available for sectoral decarbonisation approaches. They're not relevant to most SMEs, and they certainly weren't relevant to us, but they're also available. They're on the website.
What we will do is we will send out a link to the recording, and in that email we will also, again, Monica, if you're happy, share your contact details, and we'll put the links that you're posting in the chat window right now. We'll put that also in the follow-up email so that people have access to that. We have time for one more question from Phil. He says, I appreciate you're not focusing on this with your target reduction, but he's interested in the emission factors we've used to estimate emissions from purchased goods and services. He assumes it's based on dollars spent, but how granular is that estimate? Emily, I know you've spent a lot of time finding those emission factors. Maybe you can explain a little bit what we did.
Yes, so they are based on dollars spent, but they're we went through all of our purchases, categorized them as to type, and used extended input-output LCA results. So, extended input-output lifecycle assessment results, which is, it looks at from a top-down approach in terms of what the impacts are per dollar spent in different sectors. So, and it's quite detailed. You can look at if you're, for instance, purchasing IT equipment, or if you're using telecoms services or professional services, and so on and so forth. So we went into quite a bit of detail. There are other ways. If you know what you're purchasing, there are now a lot of EPDs that are available for different products. So you might be able to use those to have a specific impact, especially if it's product related. And obviously, if you are using extended input-output databases, you need to look at how those impacts might change depending on whether you're using them in New Zealand with a low emissions grid, or Australia, or if the factors come from elsewhere.
What we also have done is we have encouraged our legal advisor and our design agency that we're using to actually measure their own footprint, so that we don't have to rely on emission factors. So we are in our little supply chain even trying to encourage our suppliers to go down that track.
Power of this, isn't it? That you can have those conversations. No one's expecting the revolution to occur overnight, but having those conversations just triggers, okay, well, let's do that. And I think, as we saw from the poll response, there's a lot of appetite for driving that kind of sustainability leadership in a very practical way.
Yeah, so we've actually used it for that purpose as well, to not only say what we're doing, but actually to get those suppliers that we have on the same journey as well. And some have started measuring carbon. So it is possible to bring the supply chain along. Well, with that, I think we've come to the end of the time for today. I just wanted to make you aware of a few more webinars. There's actually a detailed Scope 3 emissions workshop together again with Monica next Tuesday. That's a real workshop online, so it's a bit longer, a bit more detailed. I think there is possibly one more space or so left to fill. So if you're interested, reach out and we'll send you the details. My colleague Steve will be talking about EPDs, and our next webinar is on materiality assessment, and that's on the 4th of June. With that, thank you very much again, Monica and Emily, for sharing your insights, and I hope that all of you out there will now get on to the science-based targets journey.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thanks, Barbara. Bye all. Look forward
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Barbara. Bye.
Bye, everyone.